I asked my daughter-in-law when the wedding was and she laughed. We actually got married last week, just for special people. A month later, she called in a panic crying that the rent was overdue and asking if I had transferred the money. I simply replied, "Did I not tell you I only pay rent for special people?" Before I continue this story of how I taught my entitled family a lesson they will never forget, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic people who only loved you for your wallet. My name is George Baxter. I am 63 years old. If you looked at me working the morning shift at the local hardware store, wearing faded denim and a worn-out flannel shirt that smelled of sawdust and motor oil, you would see a perfectly ordinary widower trying to keep busy. You would not see the man who sold his regional logistics empire 5 years ago for $14 million. After my wife Diane passed away, the big empty house and the massive bank accounts brought me absolutely no comfort. I placed the money in a blind trust, kept a modest suburban home, and took a minimum wage job just to have a reason to wake up in the morning. I wanted a simple life. I also wanted to see if my son Aaron would love me without the deep pockets of the family business constantly bailing him out. I was a foolish, hopeful old man. Aaron was my only child. When Diane died, I poured all my grief into making sure his life was perfectly cushioned, hoping to spare him the pain of our loss. When he moved to downtown Chicago with his fiancée Brittany, I did not want them to struggle the way Diane and I did when we were young and building our company from the ground up. I secured a lease for them in a beautiful high-rise apartment overlooking the city skyline. I paid their $3,000 monthly rent without a single complaint. When Brittany complained that their massive space felt empty, I bought every single piece of furniture in that apartment. The plush velvet sofa, the custom dining table, the imported rugs, the smart appliances. Everything they touched, sat on, or slept in was bought with my quiet generosity. I never rubbed it in their faces. I never asked for a thank you. I just wanted to be part of my son's life. I wanted to feel like I still had a family. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I sat at my modest kitchen table, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and my reading glasses in the other. I was going over my budget for the month. Aaron had mentioned the week before that they were finalizing the caterer for their upcoming wedding. They had vaguely discussed a summer date, but getting details out of them was always an exhausting chore. I had written out a beautiful greeting card, telling Aaron how proud Diane would have been to see him become a husband. Tucked inside that card was a check for $5,000, a little extra gift to help them start their married life without any financial stress. I picked up my phone and dialed Aaron's number, intending to ask for the exact date of the ceremony so I could finalize the catering payment directly with the vendor. The phone rang 4 times. Finally, the line clicked open. It was not Aaron. It was Brittany. Her voice had that breathy, condescending tone she always used with me, the tone you use when humoring a confused child. "Hello, George," she sighed. I could hear the ambient noise of a television playing in the background. "Brittany." "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice warm and steady. "I was hoping to catch Aaron. I wanted to finalize the payment for your caterer and get the exact date of the ceremony so I can book my suit rental." There was a pause. It was not an awkward pause. It was a calculating one. Then she let out a soft, dismissive little laugh that sent a strange, terrible chill down the back of my neck. "Oh, George," she said, her words dripping with a sickly sweet poison. "Did Aaron not tell you we actually got married last week?" The kitchen suddenly felt very cold. The coffee in my mug stopped warming my hands. I sat perfectly still, staring at the blue ink on the check resting on the wooden table. "Married last week," I repeated. My voice was barely a whisper. My mind scrambled to process the information. My only son. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle. The boy whose mother I had buried. He had gotten married, and I was sitting here in my kitchen entirely oblivious. "Yes." Brittany continued, completely unbothered by the absolute devastation she had just delivered. "We decided to cancel the big event. It was just too much stress to organize everything. We went to the courthouse and had a lovely private dinner afterward. We decided to keep it really intimate. You know, just for special people. Just for special people. The phrase hit me with the force of a freight train. It echoed off the quiet walls of my kitchen, ringing in my ears over and over again. Special people. The people who were invited to witness the most important day of my son's life did not include the father who had sacrificed everything for him. I was good enough to pay $3,000 a month so they could live in luxury. I was good enough to furnish their pristine apartment. I was good enough to be treated like an automated teller machine that dispensed cash whenever they experienced a minor inconvenience. But I was not a special person. I was not worthy of standing beside my son as he exchanged his vows. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the phone line. I could hear Brittany breathing, waiting for my reaction. I am sure she expected me to cry. Perhaps she expected me to yell, to demand an explanation, to beg for their love and attention, the way I had been doing for the past 2 years. She wanted the drama. She wanted the satisfaction of hearing the pathetic old man fall apart, so she could tell her friends how unhinged her father-in-law was. But the tears did not come. Instead, a profound, icy clarity washed over me. The grieving, desperate father who walked on eggshells for crumbs of affection died in that chair. The man who replaced him was the ruthless business owner who had built a massive logistics empire from absolutely nothing. I looked at the check. I looked at my phone. I took a deep breath. "I understand," I said. My voice was perfectly flat, devoid of any anger, any sorrow, any emotion at all. "Wait, what?" Brittany stammered, clearly thrown off balance by my calm response. "Are you not going to pay the caterer cancellation fee? We still owe them for the deposit," and I ended the call. Did not say goodbye. I set the phone down on the table. I opened my laptop. It took exactly 4 clicks to log into my banking portal. I navigated to the recurring transfers tab. There it was, the $3,000 payment scheduled to leave my account on the 1st of every month, headed straight to their Chicago landlord. I clicked cancel. The screen asked for confirmation. I clicked confirm. A small green checkmark appeared on the screen, signaling that the transaction was permanently deleted. The financial umbilical cord was severed forever. They had chosen to exclude me from their lives, so I was simply respecting their boundaries. I reached for the beautiful wedding card I had written. I slid the $5,000 check out from under the flap. I held it between my fingers, feeling the crisp paper. I tore it in half. Then I put the halves together and tore them again. I continued tearing until the generous gift was nothing more than a pile of useless confetti resting on the table. I swept the pieces into my hand and dropped them into the trash can. I did not feel angry. I felt entirely liberated. My son and his new wife believed they had just put me in my place. They believed I would continue to fund their extravagant lifestyle out of some misplaced sense of parental duty. They had vastly underestimated me. They wanted a life reserved only for special people. I was going to let them pay for it. 30 days passed since the day my son and his new wife casually informed me I was not special enough to attend their wedding. 30 days of absolute, uninterrupted silence. I spent my mornings working my shift at the local hardware store, finding a strange, quiet comfort in the physical labor. Stocking heavy boxes of copper fittings and smelling cut pine kept my mind focused. I knew the silence from Chicago was not peace. It was ignorance. Aaron and Brittany had spent the last month living their luxurious, exclusive life, completely unaware that the safety net they took for granted no longer existed. They never checked their bank accounts. They just swiped their premium credit cards, fully assuming my money would magically appear to cover their extravagant trail. It was a Thursday afternoon when their illusion finally shattered. I was in aisle 7 organizing a display of power tools when my cell phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Brittany. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It stopped, then immediately started buzzing again. 3 consecutive calls in less than 2 minutes. This was panic. They had finally hit the financial wall. I wiped my hands on my denim apron, walked out to the quiet loading dock behind the store, and pressed accept on the 4th ring. She did not even say hello. "George, the rent is overdue." Her voice was high-tight and completely stripped of that arrogant, breathless tone she had used 30 days ago. The property manager just posted a 3-day pay or quit notice directly on our front door. "Did you forget to authorize the transfer?" Listen to the specific phrasing she chose to use. "Did you forget?" She was already attempting to control the narrative, trying to gaslight me in real time. She constructed a reality where I had simply made an elderly, absent-minded mistake with my banking portal, completely ignoring the fact that she had intentionally excluded me from my only son's wedding. I leaned against the cold brick wall of the loading dock, watching a delivery truck idle in the yard. I did not speak immediately. I let her sit in the crushing silence. The absence of my frantic apology rattled her. "George, are you there? We need the cash right now. The landlord is being completely unreasonable. We tried to tell him there was a banking error with your account, but he refused to listen to us. You know how terrible my anxiety gets, George. You are triggering my panic attacks over a simple banking error. You need to wire the $3,000 right this second before they charge us late fees and ruin our credit." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. When my wife Diane was alive, she would have rushed straight to the bank. She would have apologized profusely for the delay, absolutely terrified of making Aaron upset. We had spent decades insulating our son from the consequences of his own actions. We bought him the safest cars, bailed him out of irresponsible college debts, and funded his downtown lifestyle because we thought that was how parents demonstrated love. We created a monster of entitlement. But Diane was gone, and the man standing on the loading dock was done paying for a relationship that did not actually exist. Before I could even respond to Brittany, I heard a sudden scuffle over the line. The sound of the phone forcefully changing hands. Then came my son's voice, sharp, demanding, and dripping with unearned superiority. "Dad, what exactly is going on with you?" Aaron barked. "You are embarrassing us." The property manager taped a bright yellow eviction warning on our door for the entire hallway to see. "I have important clients who live in this building, Dad. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to have my neighbors see a collection notice? Why did you not handle the rent on the 1st of the month like you always do?" I closed my eyes, letting his accusations wash over me. I analyzed his words like a business contract. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask if I was experiencing sudden financial trouble. He did not ask if I was sick or in the hospital. His only concern was his public image and his personal inconvenience. "You need to fix this immediately," Aaron demanded, his voice echoing loudly in my ear. "Brittany is crying in the living room. She is completely stressed out, and it is entirely your fault. Call the building management right now, pay the balance, and tell them you made a mistake with your routing number. You are making us look like deadbeats." I listened to the boy I had raised. He sounded exactly like a demanding customer complaining to a subordinate employee. He felt he owned my resources. He felt entirely entitled to my hard-earned wealth without offering a single shred of respect in return. I spent 40 years negotiating with ruthless union bosses, navigating massive corporate buyouts, and surviving hostile takeovers in the logistics industry. Did my son really think his amateur manipulation tactics and aggressive tone would intimidate me? They truly believed I was nothing more than an automated machine designed to fund their reality. I opened my eyes. The afternoon sun hit the concrete of the loading dock. I felt absolutely no anger. Anger implies a loss of control, and I was entirely in control of this situation. "Aaron," I said. My voice was perfectly level, quiet, and as cold as ice. The sudden chilling calm in my tone made him stop talking instantly. The frantic, heavy breathing on the other end of the line paused. He was used to me negotiating or apologizing. He was not used to this voice. "I did not make a banking error. I continued speaking very slowly so he could absorb every single syllable. I did not forget the transfer. I logged into my account 30 days ago, and I permanently canceled the recurring payment for your luxury apartment. What? Aaron gasped. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The air seemed to leave his lungs. Why would you do that? You know we do not have $3,000 liquid right now. You cannot just cut us off without warning. We are your family. I did not cut you off without warning. I replied, staring out at the empty alleyway, feeling the heavy burden of the last 2 years finally lifting off my shoulders. I listened very carefully to your wife last month. She made your new family boundaries exceptionally clear. I paused, letting the heavy silence stretch out over the cellular connection, letting the pure anxiety build and fester in his chest. Did I not tell you? I asked softly, dropping the final devastating hammer. I only pay rent for special people. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear Aaron starting to shout, his voice suddenly panicked and desperate, begging me to wait, begging me to transfer the money. I pressed the red button. I disconnected the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, turned around, and walked back inside the hardware store to finish my shift. The war had officially begun, and I had just fired the first shot. I disconnected the phone call and left my son and his wife to face the reality of their own financial incompetence. 2 days had passed since that moment. The smell of cut PVC pipe and industrial adhesive has a strange way of calming a man down. It smells like honest work. I was kneeling in the plumbing aisle of Miller Hardware, sorting heavy brass fittings into small plastic bins. The repetitive motion was exactly what I needed. Every nut and bolt had a designated place and a specific purpose. It was a simple, organized world that made sense. People in my neighborhood thought I was just a grieving widower trying to stretch his meager Social Security checks to make ends meet. They saw an old man in faded jeans and scuffed work boots sweeping the floors and restocking inventory for $14 an hour. They smiled at me with pity. I let them. I never bothered to correct them because the truth was a secret I guarded with my life. 5 years ago, my world completely stopped when my wife Diane took her last breath in a sterile hospital room. We had built a regional logistics and shipping empire completely from scratch, starting with a single used delivery truck. When I lost her, the business we built together felt like a massive hollow monument to a life I no longer wanted. I could not walk into the corporate office without expecting to see her sitting at her desk, so I sold it. I liquidated the entire company and walked away with $14 million. $14 million. It is a sum of money that can change a bloodline forever. But money without Diane felt like a curse. I placed every single penny of that fortune into an ironclad blind trust. I paid off my modest suburban home, and I applied for a minimum wage job at the local hardware store. I wanted to wake up early, I wanted my hands to ache from physical labor, and I wanted to see who my son Aaron really was. I set up a quiet, invisible test. I wanted to know if the boy we raised would still respect his father if the bottomless corporate checkbook was suddenly gone. I wanted to see if he would visit an old hardware store clerk just to ask how his day went. I wanted to know if he loved me or if he simply loved the lifestyle I provided. Aaron failed the test spectacularly. From the moment I put on this denim apron, he treated me like an embarrassing distant relative. He only visited when he needed a cosigner or a cash deposit. He never once asked about my day. He looked at my work boots with pure disgust. The test broke my heart, but it also gave me absolute clarity. I was placing the final brass fitting into its bin when the heavy automatic doors at the front of the store slid open. I did not need to look up to know who had just walked in. I could hear the sharp, rapid clicking of expensive high heels echoing against the polished concrete floor. It was a sound that absolutely did not belong in a hardware store. I stood up, slowly brushing the dust off my knees. Aaron and Brittany were marching down the main center aisle, moving with a frantic, aggressive energy. They looked entirely out of place. Aaron wore a tailored designer suit, that probably cost more than the monthly salary of everyone working in the building. Brittany was clutching a luxury handbag, her face twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic rage. They were scanning the aisles looking for me. When Brittany spotted me standing in the plumbing section, she did not hesitate. She stormed right past a display of power drills and marched directly into my aisle. Aaron followed closely behind her, his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. They had clearly spent the last 48 hours tearing their apartment apart, looking for a way to pay their landlord before coming down here to demand my surrender. "George, what is wrong with you?" Brittany shouted. Her voice was shrill and incredibly loud, bouncing off the metal shelves and immediately drawing the attention of several customers and my coworkers. I stood perfectly still, resting my hands in the pockets of my apron. I did not raise my voice. I simply watched her throw a public tantrum in the middle of a hardware store. "You ignored all of our text messages," Aaron yelled, pointing a finger at my chest. "You ignored every single phone call. The property manager is threatening to change our locks on Monday morning if we do not hand him a cashier's check. You need to log into your bank right now and fix this mess." I looked at my son. His designer tie was slightly crooked. He looked panicked, but his panic was entirely wrapped in arrogance. He genuinely believed he could just walk into my place of employment, yell at me, and force me to submit to his demands. "I am currently on the clock, Aaron," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "If you need assistance finding a specific tool, I can help you. If you are here to yell, you are disrupting the customers." Brittany let out a loud, dramatic scoff, throwing her hands up in the air. "This is absolutely pathetic, George," she yelled, stepping closer to me. "You are a bitter old man throwing a ridiculous tantrum because you did not get an invitation to a private dinner. We did not invite you because you embarrass us. Look at you. You sweep floors for a living. You are trying to ruin your own son's life over a stupid, bruised ego. Stop acting like a child and pay the rent." Several customers at the end of the aisle had stopped pushing their carts. My manager was standing near the register, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Everyone in the store was listening to this young, wealthy couple verbally abuse an elderly hardware store clerk. I could see the pity in the eyes of the bystanders. They thought I was a poor, helpless old man being bullied by his rich son. The irony was almost poetic. The woman screaming at me about my pathetic life was currently weeks away from being thrown onto the street because she could not afford her own rent. She was insulting the only man capable of saving her from absolute financial ruin. "You need to transfer that money right now, Dad," Aaron demanded, taking another step forward. "We are not leaving this store until you pull out your phone and send the $3,000. You owe us that much after the stunt you pulled on the phone." I looked at my son and his wife. They were demanding my hard-earned wealth while simultaneously telling me I was an embarrassment. They wanted my money, but they absolutely despised the man who provided it. I slowly pulled my hands out of my apron pockets. I did not yell. I did not defend my honor. I did not mention the $14 million sitting in a blind trust waiting to be deployed against them. I simply reached over to the cleaning supplies rack next to me. I grabbed a wooden mop handle with a yellow sponge head. I turned back to my son and extended my arm, offering the mop directly to him. Aaron stared at this wooden handle. He looked completely confused. His face contorted as he tried to understand what I was doing. "What is this?" Aaron asked, his voice faltering. "What are you doing?" I looked him dead in the eye, holding his gaze with absolute cold authority. "If you need money to pay your rent." "Aaron," I said, my voice carrying clearly down the quiet aisle, "we are currently hiring in aisle 4. The starting pay is $14 an hour. I suggest you start in the garden section. It gets very muddy this time of year." Brittany's jaw dropped. She looked at the mop handle and then up at my face, completely horrified by the implication. The realization that I was utterly serious, that the endless fountain of cash was truly and permanently dry, finally hit them. Aaron slapped the mop away from my hand. The wooden handle hit the concrete floor with a loud clatter. His face turned a deep shade of purple. "You are going to regret this." Aaron hissed, his voice shaking with absolute fury. "You are going to die completely alone, and I will not shed a single tear for you." He turned around and stormed down the aisle, pushing past a confused customer. Brittany glared at me, her eyes narrowed into venomous slits, before she turned on her luxury heels and followed her husband out of the store. I calmly bent down, picked up the mop, and placed it exactly where it belonged on the rack. I adjusted my denim apron and went back to sorting the heavy brass fittings into their small plastic bins. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. I felt a profound, incredible peace. They had promised I would regret cutting them off. I knew with absolute certainty they had no idea what regret truly felt like. But they were about to learn. 2 weeks had passed since the public spectacle in the plumbing aisle of Miller Hardware. 14 days of absolute unbothered silence. I spent those days falling into a comfortable rhythm. I woke up at 5 in the morning, drank my black coffee, and watched the sun slowly rise over my quiet suburban street. I tended to my garden, I read historical biographies on my back porch, and I worked my shifts at the store with a clear head. The oppressive, heavy anxiety that had weighed on my chest for the past 2 years was completely gone. I no longer jumped every time my cell phone rang, fearing another manufactured emergency or a sudden demand for cash. I thought the worst was over. I assumed that after humiliating themselves in public, Aaron and Brittany had finally realized the bank of Dad was permanently closed. I assumed they were busy figuring out how to pack their luxury apartment before the eviction notice forced them onto the street. I was wrong. I had severely underestimated the depths of their entitlement and the sheer magnitude of their desperation. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my favorite leather armchair, listening to the rain tap against the window glass. The house was quiet and peaceful. Then my phone chimed. It was not a text message or a phone call. It was a push notification from the premium credit monitoring service I had maintained ever since I sold my logistics company. When you have $14 million sitting in a blind trust, you do not take chances with your financial identity. I picked up the phone and tapped the screen. The notification was a high-priority alert warning me of a hard inquiry on my credit report. I frowned, adjusting my reading glasses. I had not applied for any new lines of credit in over a decade. I logged into the secure application and opened the detailed report. My eyes scanned the screen and my heart went completely still. A brand new auto loan had just been approved and finalized. The total financed amount was $95,000. The lender was a high-end luxury automotive dealership located in downtown Chicago, just 3 blocks away from the apartment my son was currently being evicted from. The primary applicant on the loan was Aaron Baxter. The secondary applicant, the primary financial guarantor, who held the ultimate legal responsibility for the $95,000 debt, was me, George Baxter. I sat in the dim light of my living room staring at the glowing numbers on my phone screen. $95,000. They were about to be thrown out onto the street for failing to pay their rent, but they had somehow justified purchasing a luxury sport utility vehicle. The sheer financial insanity of that decision was staggering, but that was not what made my blood run cold. What chilled me to the bone was the method. Aaron had digitally signed my name on a legally binding financial contract. He had committed identity theft. He had committed fraud. I closed my eyes and let the reality of the situation wash over me. I knew exactly how he had done it. When he was in college, I had co-signed a small student loan for him to help him build credit. He still had my social security number, my previous banking details, and my personal identification information saved on his computer. He simply took that old information, went into a luxury car dealership, and submitted an online application using my flawless credit score to secure a vehicle he could never afford on his own. He digitally forged my signature on the guarantor forms. The arrogance of his plan was almost laughable. Aaron genuinely believed I was a technological dinosaur. He thought I was just a tired old hardware store clerk who still wrote paper checks at the grocery store and balanced a physical checkbook at the kitchen table. He assumed I did not know what a credit monitoring application was. He figured I would not notice the $95,000 fraudulent loan until the dealership eventually mailed a physical collection notice to my house months down the line. He thought he could drive around Chicago in a brand new luxury vehicle on my dime, and by the time I figured it out, it would be too late to do anything about it. In the past, I would have immediately panicked. I would have called the police or driven straight to the dealership to scream at the finance manager. I would have acted out of pure emotion and parental betrayal. But the father who reacted with emotion died the day he found out his son got married without him. I did not feel panic. I felt a cold, calculating focus. My son had just crossed the line from a spoiled, entitled brat to a federal criminal. I did not call the police. I dialed a different number. I called Warren Reed. Warren was my corporate attorney. He was the man who had flawlessly negotiated the $14 million sale of my logistics empire. Warren was a shark in a tailored suit. He was brilliant, ruthless, and fiercely loyal to me. He answered the phone on the second ring despite the late hour. "George," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "It is late. Is everything all right?" "Warren, I need your advice," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "My son Aaron just used my social security number to digitally forge my signature on a $95,000 auto loan at a luxury dealership in Chicago." The credit monitoring alert just hit my phone. The line went silent for a few seconds. I could hear the faint sound of Warren typing on a keyboard in the background. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted from a friendly greeting to absolute razor-sharp legal focus. "Do not freeze your credit yet, George." Warren instructed, his voice hard and precise. "Do not call the dealership. Do not call the police. Do not do anything that would alert Aaron or the finance department that we know about this transaction." I frowned, staring at the rain hitting the window. "Why not? If I freeze it now, I can stop the sale before they take the car." "That is exactly why you are not going to stop it," Warren explained. "Listen to me very carefully, George. Right now, Aaron has submitted fraudulent documents. That is a crime, but it is a crime we can currently intercept and mitigate. If you call the dealership, they will just cancel the loan and kick him off the lot. He will get a slap on the wrist. But if you wait, if you let the ink dry on those contracts, if you let the dealership process the digital wire transfer, and you let your son physically drive that $95,000 luxury vehicle off the dealership lot, the situation fundamentally changes." I gripped the phone tightly, starting to understand the sheer magnitude of the trap Warren was proposing. "If he drives that car off the lot," Warren continued, "it immediately elevates this from an attempted fraud to a completed felony grand theft auto and federal wire fraud. He is using digital channels to steal nearly $100,000 of institutional funds backed by your stolen identity. If we want to truly hold him accountable, we have to let him complete the crime. We have to let him establish an undeniable concrete paper trail that no defense attorney in the country can excuse." The absolute brilliance of the strategy settled over me. Warren was not suggesting we defend against the attack. He was suggesting we open the door wide, let the enemy walk directly into the center of the room, and then lock the door behind them. He wanted to turn a momentary lapse in judgment into a permanent, unavoidable consequence. "Are you telling me to let my son steal a luxury car using my name?" I asked, wanting to be absolutely certain I understood the legal implications. "I am telling you to let a criminal hand us all the evidence we need to destroy him," Warren replied coldly. "We let him take the car. We let the bank fund the loan. We give it exactly 48 hours for the paperwork to officially process through the federal banking system. Then we strike. We will report the fraud directly to the lender and the authorities simultaneously. We will present your digital login logs proving you were nowhere near the dealership or the signing device. We will trap him in a cage built entirely by his own greed." I sat in the quiet living room listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. I thought about Aaron and Brittany celebrating their clever little trick. I pictured them sitting in the leather seats of a car they did not own, laughing at the foolish old man sweeping floors at the hardware store. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had found a secret back door to my wallet. They had no idea they were actively wrapping a legal noose around their own necks. "Do it, Warren," I said, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "Let them have the car. Let them drive it off the lot. We will let them dig their own grave." "I will monitor the loan origination from my end, George," Warren replied. "Get some sleep. The next few days are going to be very interesting." I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the table. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The pain of my son's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in the center of my chest, but it was completely overshadowed by a profound sense of justice. Aaron and Brittany wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial deception. They were about to learn that they had brought a pair of rusty scissors to a gunfight. I was going to let them enjoy their stolen luxury vehicle for a few days. Let them show it off to their friends. Let them drive it to the apartment they were about to be evicted from. Their punishment was coming, and it was going to be absolute. The morning sun cast a warm golden glow across my kitchen counter. It was a Thursday, and I was enjoying a rare day off from the hardware store. I stood by the window holding a steaming mug of black coffee, watching a pair of robins gather twigs for a nest in the old oak tree outside. My home was a sanctuary of peace and order. Every surface was spotless. Every book was neatly aligned on its shelf. I had spent the early hours of the morning reviewing my garden plans for the upcoming spring season. The silence in the house was a comforting presence. It was a sharp contrast to the chaotic financial storm I knew was brewing in Chicago. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling completely grounded and secure. Then a sharp, firm knock echoed from the front door. I set my mug down on a coaster and walked through the hallway. I expected a delivery driver, or perhaps a neighbor dropping off misdelivered mail. When I opened the heavy wooden door, I did not find a familiar face. A woman in a crisp gray business suit stood on my porch. She held a thick leather binder clutched tightly against her chest. An official identification badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. She looked to be in her late 30s with a serious professional expression that suggested she was bracing herself for an unpleasant encounter. She glanced down at her paperwork and then looked back up at me. Her eyes scanned my clean-pressed shirt and my neatly combed hair. She seemed momentarily confused but quickly regained her professional composure. She introduced herself as an investigator from the State Department of Adult Protective Services. I remained perfectly still, letting the weight of her words settle over the porch. The Department of Adult Protective Services is an agency designed to rescue vulnerable elderly individuals from neglect and abuse. They intervene when a person can no longer care for themselves. I simply nodded and asked her how I could be of assistance. The agent cleared her throat and explained that she was mandated to conduct a wellness check. She told me her office had received a highly disturbing and detailed report regarding my living conditions and my mental health. The investigator began to list the specific allegations from her file. She kept her voice gentle, but the words were incredibly heavy. The anonymous caller claimed that I was a 63-year-old man suffering from a rapid and severe cognitive decline. The report stated that my house had become an extreme hoarding hazard, filled with rotting garbage and structural dangers. The caller insisted that I was entirely incapable of managing my own daily hygiene or basic nutrition. Finally, the agent noted a severe accusation of financial mismanagement. The caller claimed I was aimlessly squandering my life savings and forgetting to pay crucial basic expenses like rent and utility bills. I listened to the litany of lies without blinking. It took less than a second for my mind to connect the dots. The anonymous caller was not anonymous to me. It was Brittany. She was retaliating. I had permanently canceled the $3,000 rent transfer that funded her luxury lifestyle. In her mind, I had forgotten to pay a basic bill. Her response to being cut off was not to find a job or downsize her apartment. Her response was to weaponize a government agency against me. She fabricated a horrific story of senility and squalor to punish me for closing my wallet. I felt a brief wave of profound disgust wash over me, but I quickly pushed the emotion aside. Disgust is a useless feeling. Logic and strategy are the only tools that matter in a conflict of this magnitude. The investigator shifted her weight, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and firm legal duty. She explained the ultimate goal of the concerned family members who had filed the report. They were not simply asking the state to check on my welfare. They were actively petitioning the courts for an emergency order of legal guardianship. They wanted a judge to declare me mentally incompetent and physically incapable of handling my own life. They requested that the state grant them total control over my healthcare decisions and complete access to all of my financial assets. They wanted the authority to forcefully relocate me from my home and place me in a managed care facility for my own safety. The sheer calculated evil of their plan was breathtaking. Aaron and Brittany were facing imminent eviction and financial ruin because of their own gross negligence. To solve their crisis, they decided to legally steal my autonomy. If a judge granted them emergency guardianship, they could legally sell my house against my will. They wanted to lock me in a sterile room and strip mine my entire life to fund their downtown Chicago fantasy. They truly believed I was a defenseless target. They believed an investigator would show up and intimidate an old man into submission. I did not raise my voice. I did not act defensive or outraged. When a person is falsely accused of being erratic and mentally unstable, the worst possible reaction is to act erratic and mentally unstable. Instead, I offered the investigator a warm, polite smile. I stepped back and opened my front door completely wide. I invited her to step inside and see the terrible hoarding conditions for herself. I asked her if she preferred her coffee black or with a little cream. The agent stepped over the threshold and stopped completely dead in her tracks. She was expecting a labyrinth of trash and squalor. Instead, she found herself standing in a living room that belonged in an architectural magazine. The hardwood floors gleamed with fresh polish. The minimal, tasteful furniture was entirely free of dust. The morning sunlight streamed through perfectly clean windows, illuminating the vibrant green leaves of my indoor plants. There was no clutter. There was no garbage. There was only absolute, pristine order. I led her through the house, offering a polite guided tour of my supposed ruin. I showed her the kitchen where my stainless steel appliances sparkled, and my pantry was neatly stocked with fresh, healthy food. I guided her down the hallway to show her the immaculate bathrooms and the freshly laundered linens folded perfectly in the closet. The investigator walked silently behind me. Her rigid professional posture began to crumble. She looked genuinely embarrassed. She realized almost immediately that the physical allegations in her file were completely fabricated. I guided the agent into my private study. This room was my command center. I offered her a seat in a comfortable leather chair opposite my large oak desk. I sat down and opened the top drawer. I pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. I placed it on the desk and slid it toward her. I explained that I preferred to keep physical records of my local expenditures in addition to my digital portals. I invited her to review my financial mismanagement. She opened the ledger and found meticulously categorized entries detailing every utility payment, property tax installment, and grocery receipt. Everything was balanced to the exact penny. My financial organization was flawless. The investigator closed the ledger and sighed, apologizing for the intrusion. She admitted that the report seemed completely ungrounded. But I was not finished. A false accusation of cognitive decline leaves a permanent stain on a public record if it is not thoroughly and clinically destroyed. I needed to obliterate Brittany's lie so completely that no judge would ever entertain a guardianship petition from my son again. I opened the bottom drawer of a secure filing cabinet. I retrieved a sealed medical envelope with the crest of a prominent regional medical center stamped on the front. I handed the envelope to the agent. I explained that I managed a highly complex private trust, and the strict bylaws of that trust required me to undergo an extensive cognitive and psychological evaluation every 2 years. I told her I had completed my most recent evaluation exactly 3 months ago. The agent opened the envelope and reviewed the official medical documents. The paperwork was signed by a highly respected board-certified psychiatrist. The clinical conclusion was unambiguous. My memory, executive functioning, and psychological stability were graded in the highest possible percentiles. I was certified as operating with perfect mental acuity. The investigator carefully placed the medical evaluation back on the desk. Her face flushed with a deep professional embarrassment. She realized the full scope of what had just happened. She had been weaponized by a greedy family attempting to commit legal fraud. She stood up and apologized profusely. She assured me that she would immediately close the case. She stated clearly that she would flag the original report in the state database as an entirely malicious and fabricated claim. She told me that any future attempts by these callers to petition for guardianship would be blocked by her decisive field notes. I walked the investigator back to the front door, thanking her for her diligence and her time. I watched her walk down the driveway and get into her state-issued vehicle. She drove away, leaving my quiet suburban street perfectly peaceful once more. I closed the heavy wooden door and locked the deadbolt. Aaron and Brittany had tried to strike a fatal blow. They had tried to erase my freedom and lock me away in a facility to cover their debts. Instead, they had just handed me a certified government document proving their own malicious intent. I walked back into my kitchen and poured myself another cup of hot black coffee. The battlefield had shifted once again, and my enemies were rapidly running out of ammunition. The failed wellness check was a turning point. Aaron and his wife had fired their best shot and missed completely. I knew they would not stop. Desperation makes people incredibly predictable. Their luxury apartment eviction was looming, and the first payment on that $95,000 stolen vehicle was rapidly approaching. They were bleeding cash, and they were terrified. To protect my property, I spent my weekend installing a network of high-definition security cameras around the perimeter of my house. The cameras were small and perfectly hidden under the eaves of the roof and the shadows of the porch. They sent motion alerts directly to my cell phone. I wanted to know exactly who was approaching my front door when I was away working my shifts at the hardware store. I did not have to wait long for the trap to spring. It was a cloudy Wednesday afternoon. I was on my lunch break sitting in the quiet break room at the back of the store eating a simple sandwich. My phone vibrated softly on the table. The screen displayed a motion alert from the camera aimed directly at my driveway and mailbox. I opened the application and watched the live video feed. A sleek black vehicle was parked half a block down the street, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. It was the same luxury vehicle my son had fraudulently purchased using my stolen identity. I watched as the driver's side door opened. Aaron stepped out onto the sidewalk. He was wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled down low over his forehead. He looked around nervously, scanning the quiet suburban street to make sure the neighbors were not watching. He walked quickly up my driveway, keeping his head down. He did not walk toward the front door. He walked directly to the brick mailbox, standing at the edge of my lawn. I watched my only son open the metal door of the mailbox and reach his hand inside. He pulled out a thick stack of Daily Mail. He quickly shuffled through the envelopes, tossing the grocery store flyers and hardware catalogs back inside. He only kept the envelopes that looked official. He kept the envelopes from insurance companies and medical providers. He was specifically hunting for bank statements. He shoved the stolen mail under his jacket, closed the mailbox door, and hurried back down the street toward his stolen car. I sat in the break room chewing my food slowly. Stealing mail from a residential mailbox is a federal offense. It carries severe penalties. I could have saved the video, sent it to the postal inspector, and had him arrested before dinner time. But I did not want to send him to jail over a few stolen envelopes. I wanted to understand his strategy. Aaron was not stealing mail just to cause a nuisance. He was conducting financial espionage. He was gathering intelligence for a war he fully intended to wage against me in a courtroom. Aaron and his wife were planning to sue me. I knew they were crafting a lawsuit for implied continuous support. They wanted a judge to force me to continue paying their rent and their car loans because I had done it in the past. But lawyers cost money and lawsuits take time. Before Aaron committed to a massive legal battle, he needed to know exactly how much money he could squeeze out of me. He needed to know my total net worth. He wanted to see my bank statements to figure out if I was a target worth bleeding dry. If he discovered the $14 million sitting in my blind trust, he would hire an army of vicious attorneys to tear my life apart. I finished my lunch and dialed my attorney, Warren. He answered immediately. I told Warren exactly what I had just watched on the security feed. I explained that Aaron was systematically stealing my mail to gauge my financial vulnerability. Warren was completely silent for a moment. Then he suggested we contact the federal authorities right away and put an end to the harassment. I told Warren no. I told him we were going to use my son's espionage against him. We were going to feed him poison disguised as an absolute truth. I explained my plan to Warren. If Aaron thinks I am a multimillionaire, he will fight to the bitter end. He will drag this out for years because the potential payout is too enormous to ignore. But if Aaron thinks I am just a poor, tired hardware store clerk with almost nothing to my name, he will change his entire strategy. A greedy man does not waste his time and resources trying to squeeze water from a dry stone. We needed to create a financial illusion so perfect and so convincing that Aaron would bet his entire future on it. We needed to make him believe I was almost entirely broke. Warren understood the assignment immediately. He is a master of financial maneuvering, and creating a decoy account was simple work for him. That very afternoon, we opened a new standard checking account at a small, mundane local credit union. It was the kind of bank an elderly man working retail would use. We transferred exactly $18,400 into the account. We made sure the transaction history looked completely authentic. We set up automated payments for my basic utilities and my grocery bills. We made the account look like the meager life savings of a man who was barely surviving on Social Security and minimum wage. The most important step was the mail delivery. I specifically opted out of paperless billing. I requested that the credit union mail physical paper statements to my home address on the 15th of every single month. I wanted the envelopes to be thick and clearly marked with the bank logo. I wanted them sitting in my mailbox, waiting like a piece of cheese in a mousetrap. 2 weeks later, the first paper statement arrived. I tracked the mail carrier on my porch cameras, making sure the envelope was safely delivered. Then I waited. It took less than 3 hours for the black luxury vehicle to park down the street again. I watched the live feed from my living room, sipping a glass of water. Aaron approached the mailbox with the same nervous energy as before. He opened the door and pulled out the thick envelope from the credit union. I could see the visible relief on his face even through the grainy camera footage. He shoved the statement into his pocket and practically ran back to his car. He had taken the bait perfectly. I imagined him sitting in his apartment, tearing open the envelope with greedy, trembling hands. I pictured his face dropping as he read the final balance. $18,000. To a couple drowning in over $100,000 of debt and facing immediate eviction. $18,000 was nothing. It was not enough to save them. It was not enough to pay for a drawn-out legal battle. It was barely enough to cover the depreciation on the car he had just stolen. By feeding him that fake bank statement, I had completely destroyed his timeline. Aaron now believed I was financially tapped out. He believed the fountain of cash was truly and permanently dry. He thought he had outsmarted me by stealing my mail, but he had actually just swallowed a massive dose of financial poison. He was going to make his next legal move based entirely on the illusion I had built for him. He thought he was playing chess, but he did not even realize I owned the entire board. The decoy account was the perfect weapon. It gave me total control over his perception of reality. He would stop looking for hidden trusts because his own espionage convinced him there was nothing left to find. He would become reckless and desperate because he thought he was running out of time to squeeze the last few pennies from his elderly father. I sat back in my chair, watching the empty street on my monitor. My son wanted to play the role of a clever thief. I was more than happy to provide the illusion that he had succeeded. The true reckoning was still coming, and he was completely blind to the storm gathering right above his head. I spend my Sunday mornings at a small, unpretentious diner on the edge of town. It is a quiet place where the waitresses know my name and pour my black coffee before I even sit down in my usual booth. The smell of bacon grease and toasted rye bread always reminds me of the early days when my late wife Diane and I were building our business from absolutely nothing. It is my sanctuary. It is a place where a retired man can sit in a worn vinyl seat, read the morning paper, and be left entirely alone with his thoughts. I cherished that quiet routine, but my peaceful sanctuary was about to be severely violated. I was halfway through my scrambled eggs when the small brass bell above the diner door rang violently. I did not need to look up from my newspaper to know the storm had arrived. Aaron and Brittany stormed into the quiet restaurant, moving with a frantic, aggressive energy that made several regular customers turn their heads in surprise. They looked absolutely terrible. The polished, arrogant facade they usually wore was visibly cracking under the immense weight of their new financial reality. Aaron's expensive designer shirt was severely wrinkled and his hair was unkempt. Brittany's premium makeup failed to hide the dark, exhausted circles forming under her eyes. The impending eviction and their suffocating mountain of debt were finally leaving physical marks on them. They spotted me in my corner booth and marched directly over, sliding into the vinyl seat across from me without being invited. I did not fold my newspaper. I simply lowered it slightly, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. I looked at the two desperate people sitting across from me. They were breathing heavily, acting like cornered predators preparing to strike a wounded animal. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into a psychological snare I had carefully designed alongside my corporate attorney. Aaron slapped a thick manila folder onto the sticky diner table. He ripped it open and pulled out a stack of familiar paper documents. They were the physical bank statements he had stolen from my mailbox just a few days prior. The decoy accounts displaying a pathetic and meager balance of exactly $18,000. "We know everything, Dad," Aaron said. His voice was a harsh, desperate whisper designed to intimidate me without causing a public scene. He leaned across the narrow table, pointing a shaking finger at the printed numbers on the stolen bank statements. "You are completely broke. You have been lying to us for years, pretending you were financially secure while you barely have enough to cover your own basic living expenses. You cut off our rent because you are running out of cash, and you were too embarrassed to admit it." I looked down at the stolen documents resting near my coffee mug. I had to consciously suppress a genuine smile. My son had swallowed the bait completely. He truly believed he had uncovered my deepest financial secret through his clever neighborhood espionage. He thought he possessed the absolute upper hand in this negotiation. "I have spoken to a lawyer." Aaron continued, his tone shifting into a calculated and malicious threat. "We are preparing to file a civil lawsuit against you for implied continuous support. You paid our rent and subsidized our luxury lifestyle for years, Dad. You created an established legal precedent of financial reliance. A judge will absolutely force you to liquidate whatever miserable assets you have left to fulfill your established obligations to us. We will drain this pathetic little checking account, and we will garnish your hardware store wages if we have to." It was a completely frivolous and laughable legal threat. Implied continuous support is a complex legal concept usually reserved for spousal alimony or child support for minors, not for fully capable adults in their 30s. Any competent judge in the country would throw the lawsuit out immediately and sanction the attorney who filed it. But Aaron was not relying on a successful court battle. He was relying on pure fear. He assumed I was a terrified old man who would do anything to avoid the stress and public embarrassment of a lawsuit. He wanted to extort me. Then Brittany took control of the ambush. She pushed Aaron aside and leaned much closer to me. Her eyes were cold and completely devoid of any human empathy. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a thick, stapled legal document. She slid it across the table, pushing it right over my plate of eggs. I looked down at the bold printed letters on the first page. It was a property deed transfer. It was a legally binding contract transferring absolute ownership of my suburban home directly to Aaron and Brittany. "Let us be perfectly realistic," George Brittany said. Her voice dripped with a poisonous and suffocating condescension. "You have exactly $18,000 to your name. You work a minimum wage job sweeping floors at a hardware store. You are aging rapidly, and you are clearly incapable of managing your own finances anymore. We are not going to waste our precious time fighting you in court for pennies. We are offering you a very generous alternative to total bankruptcy." She tapped her manicured fingernail against the signature line of the property deed. "You are going to sign the house over to us today, George," she demanded. "We will sell the property immediately to cover our short-term debts and secure a new place to live. In exchange, we will handle the painful process of placing you in a state-funded assisted living facility. You are almost out of cash. When this tiny checking account dries up, you will have absolutely nothing left. We will take over your power of attorney, and we will manage your remaining years in a state facility so you do not freeze to death on the street. It is the only logical choice you have left." I sat in the vinyl booth, listening to the low hum of the diner refrigerators and the gentle clinking of silverware around me. I stared at the property deed resting on the table. My own son and his wife were actively trying to steal the home where I had lived with Diane for 30 years. They wanted to strip me of my sanctuary, sell my precious memories to the highest bidder, and lock me away in a miserable, underfunded state institution simply to pay for their luxury downtown lifestyle. They believed my entire existence was just a resource to be consumed and discarded when it was no longer convenient. They were looking at me with victorious, greedy eyes, fully expecting me to break down and sign my life away. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or try to defend my financial stability. I did not tell them about the $14 million resting securely in an offshore blind trust generating more interest in a single day than they earned in a month. I simply looked at the fraudulent property deed, and then I looked directly into Brittany's eyes. I allowed a slow, genuine smile to spread across my face. The smile completely unsettled them. Brittany's confident, predatory posture faltered immediately. Aaron shifted nervously in his seat, glancing around the diner as if he expected someone to jump out and surprise them. They expected a desperate old man begging for mercy. They did not expect a man who found their grand extortion attempt mildly amusing. I slowly reached into the pocket of my faded flannel shirt. I pulled out my old leather wallet. I did not take out a pen to sign their ridiculous and insulting document. I took out a crisp $5 bill. I placed the $5 bill directly on top of the property deed, right over the blank signature line to cover the cost of my breakfast and coffee. I carefully folded my newspaper and tucked it neatly under my arm. I slid out of the vinyl booth, standing tall and perfectly composed. I looked down at the two pathetic, desperate people sitting at the table. Their massive extortion plot had just collapsed against a solid wall of absolute indifference. "You both look incredibly tired," I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly polite. "You really should not be wasting your Sunday morning trying to intimidate an old man in a diner. You should save your energy. You have an eviction to pack for." I turned around and walked toward the exit. I did not look back to see their faces. I did not wait to hear their panicked reaction. I simply pushed open the glass door and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The brass bell above the door chimed a cheerful goodbye. They had tried to trap me in a corner using a financial illusion I had specifically built for them. They thought they were holding a winning hand, but they were playing a game that was already completely over. I walked to my truck feeling a profound and unshakable sense of peace. The extortion attempt had failed spectacularly, and the clock ticking down to their absolute ruin was about to strike zero. 30 days after the diner incident, my life returned to a state of quiet equilibrium. I spent my mornings at the hardware store and my evenings tending to the rose bushes my late wife Diane had planted along the back fence. The air was growing cooler, hinting at the approaching autumn. I genuinely believed my son and his wife had finally exhausted their playbook. I thought the utter failure of their property deed extortion had finally convinced them that I was no longer a viable target. I was wrong. Desperation is a powerful and blinding force. When a person is staring down the barrel of absolute financial ruin, they do not surrender. They simply sink to unimaginable depths. It was a Thursday evening. I was sitting in my living room reading a book when my cell phone shattered the quiet atmosphere. The caller identification displayed Aaron's name. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment. I knew better than to expect an apology, but curiosity got the best of me. I answered the call and pressed the phone to my ear. I was immediately met with the sound of violent weeping. It was not a subtle cry. It was a loud, hyperventilating performance. "Dad, please help me," Aaron sobbed, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. "You have to help us. Please, Dad, I do not know what else to do." I kept my voice perfectly level. "What is happening, Aaron?" He let out a ragged gasp. "We were in an accident. A terrible car accident on the interstate. Another driver ran a red light and smashed right into the passenger side. Brittany is hurt, Dad. She is hurt really bad. We are at the Memorial Hospital and the doctors say she needs emergency surgery to repair a shattered femur and internal bleeding. But there is a massive problem with our insurance network." I listened to the frantic narrative unspool. He claimed the hospital administration was refusing to admit Brittany to the surgical ward because they were out of network. He said the billing department was demanding a $10,000 upfront deductible before they would even take her into the operating room. He was begging me, crying that his wife was in agonizing pain sitting in a hospital hallway while bureaucrats argued over money. He pleaded with me to drain the remaining $18,000 from my checking account to save her life. The story was an absolute masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It was designed to bypass logic and trigger the primal protective instincts of a parent. Any normal father would have rushed out the door in a blind panic, completely willing to empty his bank accounts to save his family. But I was not a normal father anymore. I was a man who had spent the last several weeks watching my son orchestrate a relentless campaign to destroy my life. And then Aaron crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "Dad, please, you have to do this," Aaron cried, his voice echoing through my quiet living room. "Think about Mom. Think about Diane. You know she would never let Brittany suffer like this. Mom loved family more than anything. If Mom were here, she would be rushing to the hospital right now to save her daughter-in-law. Please do not let Mom down. You promised her you would always protect our family." My blood turned to absolute ice. The sheer audacity of invoking my dead wife's memory to facilitate a $10,000 scam was staggering. Diane was the kindest, most selfless woman I had ever known. She had worked her fingers to the bone to build our business and give our son a beautiful life. To hear him use her name, her legacy, as a cheap bargaining chip to extort cash from me was a level of depravity I had not anticipated. It was evil. It was pure, unadulterated evil. I did not yell. I did not call him a liar. I simply let the silence hang over the phone line for a few seconds, letting him believe his emotional performance had successfully paralyzed me. "I am leaving right now, Aaron," I said, my voice thick with feigned concern. "I will be at the hospital in 20 minutes. I will bring my checkbook. Just hold on." I hung up the phone. I did not panic. I calmly put on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and walked out to my truck. I drove toward the Memorial Hospital, but my mind was completely clear. A hospital cannot legally deny emergency life-saving surgery over an upfront deductible. It is a direct violation of federal law. If Brittany was truly dying from internal bleeding, she would already be in an operating room. The entire premise of his emergency was a poorly constructed lie born out of sheer desperation. They needed $10,000 to stave off their eviction, and pay the first installment on their stolen luxury vehicle. I arrived at the hospital and parked my truck in the visitor structure. The night air was thick and humid. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the main entrance. The lobby was bright and sterile, filled with the faint smell of antiseptic and stale coffee. If a frantic husband was desperately waiting for his wife to emerge from emergency surgery, he would be pacing the floor of the intensive care waiting room. He would be harassing the front desk nurses for updates. I did not go to the emergency room. I did not go to the surgical waiting area. I walked directly past the main reception desk and headed straight down the long tiled corridor toward the hospital cafeteria. The cafeteria was relatively empty at this hour. A few tired nurses and exhausted family members sat scattered at the plastic tables picking at lukewarm food. I stood near the entrance, hiding slightly behind a large vending machine. I scanned the room with a cold, calculated gaze. It took me less than 10 seconds to find exactly what I was looking for. Sitting in a brightly lit booth in the far corner of the room was my son, Aaron. Sitting directly across from him, looking absolutely flawless, without a single scratch, bruise, or broken bone on her body, was Brittany. They were not weeping. They were not in agony. They were happily devouring an expensive spread of artisan sandwiches and bottled sparkling water they had purchased from the premium hospital deli. I stayed perfectly still watching them. They were laughing. Aaron was leaning across the table taking a bite of his sandwich, with a massive, relaxed smile on his face. Brittany was giggling, scrolling casually through her cell phone. The contrast between the weeping, terrified son on the phone and the arrogant, relaxed man sitting in the booth was jarring. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I opened my voice recording application and pressed the red circle to begin capturing audio. I held the phone discreetly at my side and stepped out from behind the vending machine. I walked silently across the cafeteria, moving toward their corner booth with slow, deliberate steps. The ambient noise of the hospital masked my approach. As I drew closer, their voices became perfectly clear. "I cannot believe he bought it so fast." Aaron chuckled, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I told you bringing up my mother would work. It is his ultimate weak spot. The old man is definitely going to pay up. He probably drove here going 80 miles an hour. Brittany took a sip of her sparkling water and smiled, her eyes gleaming with pure greed. "We will get the $10,000 cashier's check from him in the lobby and then tell him the doctors miraculously stabilized me without surgery. We can use $5,000 to pay off the landlord and use the rest to cover the car payment. It is perfectly foolproof. We will just tell him the hospital billed us later." They continued to outline their entire fraudulent scheme, completely oblivious to the fact that the man they were planning to rob was standing less than 10 feet away, capturing every single word on a digital recording. They were so consumed by their own perceived brilliance that they forgot to check their surroundings. I did not stop walking. I did not pause to confront them. I did not scream or flip their table over. I simply walked right past their booth, moving with a slow, steady, and impossible-to-ignore presence. I was so close I could have reached out and touched Aaron's shoulder. As I passed them, I slowly turned my head and looked directly into my son's eyes. I did not blink. I did not change my expression. I offered absolutely zero emotion. I just looked at him with the cold, dead stare of a man who was looking at a complete stranger. Aaron's laughter died instantly in his throat. The sandwich literally fell from his hands, hitting the table with a soft thud. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Brittany's smile vanished as she followed his gaze, turning to see me walking past them. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp of absolute horror. They sat frozen in their booth, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of their exposure. They realized in that exact fraction of a second that the game was entirely over. The fake tears, the elaborate lies, the weaponization of my dead wife's memory, it was all utterly destroyed. I did not say a single word. I did not need to. My absolute silence was infinitely more devastating than any screaming match could ever be. I kept walking at a steady pace, pushing open the heavy double doors of the cafeteria and stepping back out into the main hospital corridor. I stopped the voice recording on my phone and saved the audio file securely. I walked out of the hospital, back into the humid night air, and got into my truck. I turned the ignition and drove home, leaving them trapped in the paralyzing silence of their own catastrophic failure. The final nail had been driven into the coffin, and the collapse of their lives was now completely inevitable. The silence that followed the hospital incident lasted exactly 3 days. I should have known that a narcissist denied their prize does not retreat gracefully. When you back a rat into a corner, it bites. Brittany and Aaron had failed to extort me with fake property deeds, and they had failed to manipulate me with a fake medical emergency. They realized private extortion was completely useless against a man who refused to play along. So they decided to take their extortion campaign public. They decided to weaponize the internet. It started on a Sunday morning. I was sitting on my back porch drinking my coffee when my phone began to vibrate violently against the wooden table. It was not Aaron calling. It was a barrage of notifications from a social media account I rarely used. I opened the application and found my inbox flooded with messages from absolute strangers. The messages were vicious. People I had never met were calling me a monster, a greedy old tyrant, and a disgrace to fatherhood. Confused, I clicked on a link that a stranger had sent me. It led directly to a video Brittany had posted late the night before. The performance was an absolute masterpiece of digital manipulation. The camera was positioned close to her face. She was sitting on the floor of their luxury apartment, leaning against a bare wall to make it look like they were living in destitution. She wore an oversized gray sweater and no makeup. Her hair was messy. She looked completely broken. And then she began to weep. In the video, Brittany stared directly into the lens and told the world a horrific story about her cruel, wealthy father-in-law. She painted me as a manipulative millionaire who used his fortune to control and abuse his only son. She claimed I had suddenly and maliciously cut off all their financial support simply because they wanted to be independent. She cried real heavy tears as she told her audience that Aaron was working himself to the bone just to keep a roof over their heads while I sat in my massive suburban home hoarding millions of dollars and laughing at their misery. But she did not stop there. A good lie needs a truly devastating hook to go viral. Brittany wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath, and delivered the ultimate lie. She placed a trembling hand on her stomach and announced to the internet that she was pregnant. She looked right into the camera and sobbed that her evil father-in-law had abandoned his struggling son and his pregnant wife, leaving them to starve in the streets. She begged the internet for help, stating they were facing imminent eviction and had no way to pay for her prenatal medical care. She included a link to a crowdfunding campaign at the bottom of the video. I sat on my porch watching my daughter-in-law lie to millions of people. The video already had hundreds of thousands of views. The comment section was a raging fire of public outrage. Thousands of strangers were demanding my head. They were sharing my full name, my address, and the location of the hardware store where I worked. They were organizing a digital mob to destroy a man they did not even know, based entirely on the fabricated tears of a greedy woman. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound sense of pity for the people being scammed into donating their hard-earned money to fund a luxury vehicle and a downtown apartment. But pity quickly turned to cold resolve when the real-world consequences of her lies reached my sanctuary. On Monday morning, I put on my denim apron and walked into Miller Hardware for my morning shift. The store was unusually quiet, but the atmosphere was incredibly tense. My manager, an honest, hard-working man named Dave, intercepted me before I could even reach the plumbing aisle. Dave looked exhausted. He pulled me into his small office and closed the door. "George." "We have a massive problem," Dave said, rubbing his temples. "The store phone has been ringing off the hook since we opened. We have received over 200 calls from people all over the country. They are screaming at my cashiers. They are leaving terrible reviews on our business page. They are demanding that I fire you immediately for being an abusive monster to your pregnant daughter-in-law." I looked at Dave, feeling a deep wave of guilt. I had brought this circus to his doorstep. I explained the situation to him. I told him about the extortion, the fake hospital emergency, and the truth about their financial greed. Dave listened quietly. He knew me well. He knew I was a good man who worked hard and bothered absolutely nobody. He told me to take a few days off with pay until the internet mob found a new target to attack. I thanked him, took off my apron, and walked back out to my truck. Brittany had crossed the final boundary. She had brought her lies into my real life. She had threatened the livelihood of innocent people who had given me a place to work in peace. She wanted to destroy my reputation to line her own pockets. It was time to completely obliterate her reality. I sat in the cab of my truck and called Warren Reed. I did not even need to explain the situation. My corporate attorney had already seen the video. His team of legal sharks actively monitored digital platforms for anything related to my name or my trust. Warren sounded incredibly calm on the phone, but I knew him well enough to hear the predatory excitement in his voice. "George, we have a beautiful opportunity here," Warren said, his tone smooth and sharp. "Brittany has just handed us the exact rope we need to hang them both, legally speaking." I asked him if we should send a cease and desist letter to force her to take the video down. Warren actually laughed. It was a cold, calculating sound. "Absolutely not," Warren replied. "A cease and desist is a warning. It gives them the chance to delete the video, claim they are being bullied by your expensive lawyers, and play the victim all over again. We do not give warnings, George. We deliver consequences. We are going to file a massive defamation lawsuit against her immediately." I listened carefully as Warren outlined the brilliant brutality of his legal strategy. By filing a formal defamation lawsuit, we would immediately trigger the discovery process. We would not just demand money for damages. We would demand the absolute truth under the penalty of perjury. When you sue someone for defamation, Warren explained, they have to legally prove that the statements they made were true. We are going to force Brittany into a deposition room. We will put her under oath with a court reporter present. She will be legally compelled to provide medical records proving this supposed pregnancy. She will be legally compelled to provide financial records proving they are starving. When she cannot produce a single shred of evidence, she will have committed perjury on top of defamation and wire fraud. The sheer perfection of the plan settled over me. Brittany thought she could hide behind a camera lens and cry fake tears to manipulate the public. She thought the internet would act as her personal army to bully me into submission. She did not realize that the legal system does not care about viral videos or angry comments from strangers. The legal system only cares about verifiable facts. "File the lawsuit, Warren," I instructed, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. "File it today. Serve her the papers at the luxury apartment she is about to be evicted from. Make sure the process server hands it to her directly." "Consider it done, George," Warren replied. "The lawsuit will be filed before noon. We will freeze the crowdfunding account she set up by notifying the platform of the active fraud investigation. She is going to learn that lying to the internet is very different from lying under oath." I ended the call and started my truck engine. I drove slowly through my quiet suburban neighborhood, feeling a deep, unshakable calm. Brittany had tried to orchestrate a public execution of my character. She wanted to burn my name to the ground to keep herself warm. Instead, she had just willingly walked into a devastating legal trap from which there was absolutely no escape. She wanted the attention of the world. Now she was going to get the undivided attention of a federal judge. The countdown to their complete and total destruction was moving faster than ever. The lawsuit landed on my son and his wife like a massive block of concrete dropped from a towering height. When my attorney Warren filed the defamation suit, he did not ask for a modest sum or a gentle apology. He filed it with the full aggressive weight of my hidden trust fund, aiming to completely paralyze them. Aaron and Brittany were absolutely terrified by the legal blow, but their terror rapidly morphed into a desperate defensive arrogance. They could not afford a competent defense attorney because their bank accounts were bleeding dry, and their physical eviction from the luxury apartment was looming closer every single day. Instead, they scoured the bottom of the legal barrel and found a man willing to take their case on contingency. His name was Victor, a shady, fast-talking lawyer who had built his entire career shaking down insurance companies and intimidating vulnerable people into quick cash settlements. Victor looked at my faded hardware store uniform, my modest suburban zip code, and my quiet demeanor, and he made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed I was just a poor, tired old man trying to play a high-stakes legal game I could not possibly afford to maintain. Victor immediately fired back with a massive countersuit against me. The legal document he drafted was an absolute masterpiece of fiction. To fight my defamation claims and legally validate the tearful viral video Brittany had posted, Victor needed to prove to a judge that I had established a clear pattern of financial support and then maliciously abandoned my pregnant daughter-in-law to suffer. To prove this ongoing support, Victor did exactly what Warren and I had prayed he would do. He officially submitted the $95,000 luxury auto loan directly into the public court record. He proudly presented the forged guarantor signature as absolute undeniable proof that I was an active, willing participant in their lavish financial lives. By filing that specific document in a federal court, Victor legally cemented the wire fraud. Aaron and Brittany were no longer just telling lies on the internet to gain sympathy. They had willingly brought a major felony directly into the judicial system. The deposition took place on a rainy Tuesday morning inside a sterile, windowless conference room in downtown Chicago. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and the sharp ozone from a humming copy machine down the hall. I sat at the long, heavy mahogany table wearing a simple gray suit I had owned for over 10 years. Warren sat right next to me, organizing his immaculate leather binders with the calm, cold precision of a surgeon preparing for a highly complex operation. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Aaron walked in, followed closely by Brittany and their lawyer Victor. They looked incredibly smug and victorious. Aaron wore a sharp, tailored navy suit, completely ignoring my presence as he took his seat across the table. Brittany glared at me with pure venom, her hands resting protectively over her stomach to emphasize her heavily publicized pregnancy for the court reporter. Victor slapped his cheap leather briefcase onto the table, offering Warren a condescending little smile. He genuinely believed he was about to force a frightened elderly man into a lucrative immediate cash settlement. The court reporter asked Aaron and Brittany to raise their right hands and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. They both swore the legal oath without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. They placed their hands on the table and looked at Warren with defiant, arrogant expressions. They believed they held absolutely all the cards. They thought my quiet, silent demeanor across the table was a clear sign of defeat. Warren did not raise his voice. He did not show any hostility or anger. He simply opened his first binder and began the questioning with a slow, methodical, and deadly pace. Warren started by asking Aaron to describe the history of my financial involvement in their daily lives. Aaron leaned back in his comfortable chair, speaking loudly and clearly, so the court reporter would capture every single lie. He stated under oath that I had promised to pay their downtown apartment rent indefinitely. He claimed I had verbally guaranteed them total financial security so they could focus entirely on building their family without stress. Warren nodded politely, taking a note, and then steered the conversation directly toward the luxury vehicle. He slid a crisp copy of the auto loan application across the table. He asked Aaron to confirm for the official record that I had willingly and knowingly co-signed for the $95,000 car. Aaron did not even blink. He looked down at the document and confidently stated that his father happily agreed to co-sign that loan to ensure his future grandchild had safe, reliable transportation. Warren turned his attention to Brittany. He asked if she had personally witnessed me agreeing to this massive financial obligation. Brittany smiled a cold, calculated smile and replied that she was standing right there when George gave them his blessing to buy the car and told them money was no object. I sat completely silently, listening to my own flesh and blood weave a tapestry of absolute lies while legally sitting under oath. Warren gave them multiple clear opportunities to correct their statements. He asked if they were completely certain about the exact sequence of events. Aaron let out an arrogant, heavy sigh and told Warren to stop wasting everyone's time. They had fully committed to the lie. The perjury was now permanently embedded in the official legal transcript forever. Warren closed his first binder and folded his hands, resting them on the table. The polite, professional demeanor vanished instantly and was replaced by the ruthless corporate predator I paid him to be. Warren informed the room that our legal team had independently subpoenaed the digital security logs from the luxury car dealership. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his briefcase and slid it directly over to Victor. Warren explained smoothly that electronic signatures carry specific invisible footprints, including exact timestamps and Internet protocol addresses. The document clearly showed that the signature on the $95,000 loan was not executed from my modest suburban home. It was executed from an Internet protocol address registered to Aaron's specific smartphone while connected to the wireless network of their downtown Chicago apartment. The arrogant smirk on Aaron's face completely evaporated in a fraction of a second. He stared down at the security log, his mouth opening and closing silently as his brain struggled to process the disaster. Victor picked up the document, his eyes rapidly scanning the technical data. The color began to violently drain from the lawyer's face. He was a shady attorney who bent the rules, but he was not stupid. He instantly recognized the terrifying reality of what his clients had just done to him. They had not just lied to his face. They had used him to submit a forged document into a federal court proceeding and cement their own guilt. Before Victor could even attempt to formulate a panicked defense, Warren reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recording device. He placed it carefully in the exact center of the mahogany table. Warren stated loudly for the record that he was submitting an audio file captured legally in a public hospital cafeteria where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. He pressed a small button on the device. The crisp, clear audio filled the sterile conference room, echoing off the walls. Aaron's recorded voice echoed through the room, boasting about how easily he had manipulated his father. "I cannot believe he bought it so fast," the recording played. "I told you bringing up my mother would work, because it is his ultimate weak spot, and the old man is definitely going to pay up." Then Brittany's recorded voice chimed in, completely destroying her own victim narrative. "We will get the $10,000 cashier's check from him in the lobby, and then tell him the doctors miraculously stabilized me without surgery. We can use $5,000 to pay off the landlord, and use the rest to cover the car payment, because it is perfectly foolproof." I watched the absolute destruction of their false reality unfold in real time. Brittany covered her mouth with trembling, pale hands, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as she heard her own wicked words played back to her. Aaron sank down low into his leather chair, looking as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked from his lungs. The undeniable proof of their vicious extortion, their federal wire fraud, and their brazen perjury was echoing loudly for the court reporter to transcribe into the permanent record forever. Victor, the fast-talking contingency lawyer, was completely paralyzed. He stared blindly at the audio device, his skin turning a sickly shade of pale gray. He looked at Aaron and Brittany with pure, unfiltered disgust and panic. He had walked into this conference room expecting to secure a quick, lucrative settlement from a weak, intimidated old man. Instead, he realized he was currently sitting next to two individuals who had just committed multiple severe felonies under oath, while he unknowingly facilitated their crimes. The entire legal foundation they had built to destroy my reputation had just collapsed directly on top of them, crushing their future under the immense, undeniable weight of their own verifiable greed. The silence inside the sterile conference room was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that only exists in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic explosion. The digital recording device on the mahogany table had stopped playing, but the echoes of my son and his wife callously plotting their medical extortion scheme seemed to bounce off the walls. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded, watching the devastating fallout of my carefully orchestrated trap. Victor, the slick contingency attorney, who had walked into this deposition room, radiating sheer arrogance, looked as though he was having a sudden medical emergency. His face had drained of all color, transitioning from a pale gray to a sickly translucent white. He stared at the digital network logs and the recording device as if they were venomous snakes prepared to strike. Victor was an opportunistic bottom feeder who made his living bullying insurance companies and scaring vulnerable people into quick cash settlements. He was entirely comfortable bending the rules, twisting narratives, and dealing in moral gray areas. But he was not a complete fool. He knew exactly where the line was drawn between an aggressive civil lawsuit and a federal criminal conspiracy, and his clients had just dragged him violently across that line. He had just sat there acting as the official legal representative, while Aaron and Brittany knowingly and willingly committed felony perjury on the official court record. They had utilized his legal services to introduce a fraudulently obtained $95,000 auto loan into a federal proceeding. They had weaponized his license to practice law to facilitate wire fraud and extortion. Victor slowly turned his head to look at Aaron. The attorney's eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, unadulterated panic. He did not ask for a private consultation in the hallway. He did not whisper a strategic pivot to his clients. He simply reacted with pure self-preservation. Victor abruptly stood up his chair violently, scraping against the hardwood floor. He looked directly at the court reporter, his voice shaking with adrenaline and fear. "Let the record show that I, Victor Elias, am immediately and officially withdrawing as counsel for Aaron and Brittany Baxter, effective this exact second." I had absolutely no prior knowledge of the fraudulent nature of these documents or the fabricated testimonies presented here today. I am entirely severing my professional relationship with these individuals. Aaron reached out his hand trembling as he tried to grab his lawyer's sleeve. "Victor, wait. You cannot just leave us here. We can explain everything. You are our lawyer." Victor violently slapped Aaron's hand away, pulling his arm back as if my son were highly contagious. "I am not your lawyer," Victor practically shouted violently, shoving his scattered legal pads and pens back into his cheap leather briefcase. "You lied to me. You used my firm to submit forged federal documents under oath. You are facing decades in federal prison, and I will absolutely not let you drag my legal career down into the abyss with you. Do not call my office. Do not contact me." Without another word, Victor snapped his briefcase shut, turned on his heel, and sprinted for the heavy wooden door. He practically tore it open, fleeing down the hallway as fast as his legs could carry him. The heavy door slammed shut behind him, with a resonant thud, leaving Aaron and Brittany entirely abandoned, completely exposed, and utterly defenseless. The departure of their attorney acted as a brutal catalyst, shattering whatever fragile illusion of unity remained between my son and his wife. For the past 2 years, they had presented a united front, standing shoulder to shoulder, in their shared arrogance and their mutual disdain for me. They had plotted together, spent stolen money together, and laughed at my supposed ignorance together. But that partnership was built entirely on a foundation of stolen wealth and unchecked greed. Now that the money was gone and the terrifying reality of federal prison was staring them directly in the face, their marriage imploded with spectacular violent speed. Brittany turned on Aaron with the ferocity of a starving animal. The mask of the sweet, distressed, pregnant victim completely dissolved, revealing the cold, calculating opportunist beneath. She did not reach for her husband for comfort. She shoved her chair away from him, her face contorted in an ugly mask of pure rage. "Fix this." "Aaron," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "You need to fix this right now. You told me the loan was secure. You told me your father was too stupid and too old to understand digital signatures. You promised me this lawsuit would force him to pay us a massive settlement. You told me we were invincible." Aaron stared at her, utterly bewildered by her sudden venom. "Brittany, keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing nervously at the court reporter, who was still diligently typing every single word into the official legal record. "We are still under oath. We need to stop talking and figure out a plan." "There is no plan," Aaron Brittany screamed, completely ignoring his desperate warning. "You forged a federal document. You lied to our own lawyer. I am not going to a federal penitentiary because you are a complete and utter failure. I only went along with this stupid lawsuit because you swore your father would crumble. You swore he was a weak, pathetic old man who would hand over his bank accounts to avoid a public scandal. The sheer transactional nature of their relationship was suddenly laid completely bare for everyone in the room to witness. There was no love there. There was no loyalty or emotional bond. She had married him because she believed he possessed a golden ticket to an effortless life of luxury. She tolerated him solely because she thought he was the key to unlocking my hidden financial reserves. The moment he failed to provide that lavish lifestyle, the moment his incompetence threatened her own freedom, she discarded him without a single second of hesitation. Aaron's face turned a deep, blotchy shade of crimson. His humiliation rapidly morphed into a defensive, explosive anger. "Do not act like you are an innocent victim here, Brittany," he shouted back, leaning across the table toward her. "You were the one who demanded the $95,000 car. You were the one who refused to look for a job when we ran out of cash. You were the one who concocted that pathetic fake hospital story to extort $10,000 out of me because you wanted to maintain your ridiculous social media image. You drove us into this massive hole with your endless greed." They continued to tear each other to pieces, screaming accusations, and exposing every ugly, selfish facet of their marriage. They blamed each other for the eviction, for the massive credit card debts, and for the catastrophic failure of their extortion plots. They were two parasites fighting over the carcass of their own ruined lives. Warren sat quietly next to me, his hands steepled, watching the absolute destruction of their partnership with a mild clinical interest. I simply watched my son, recognizing for the very first time that there was absolutely nothing left of the boy I had raised. Aaron suddenly stopped shouting at his wife. He looked at her flushed, hateful face and finally realized that she was never going to support him. He was completely isolated. He turned his head slowly, looking across the wide mahogany table at me. The anger and the arrogant defiance vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by a hollow, sickening desperation. The reality of his impending destruction had finally broken through his massive ego. He slid out of his chair and stumbled around the edge of the conference table. He fell to his knees on the carpeted floor, stopping just a few feet away from where I sat. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his chest heaving with panicked, ragged breaths. "Dad, please," Aaron sobbed, reaching out his trembling hands toward my shoes. "Please, you have to stop this. Tell Warren to drop the lawsuit. Tell him to erase that recording. We will give the car back today. We will drop our countersuit immediately. Just make this all go away. I am begging you, Dad. Please do not do this to me." I looked down at the weeping man on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no urge to comfort him. Aaron continued to grovel, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Dad, if we have to pay these legal fees, we will be completely ruined. We are totally broke. We have absolutely nothing left in our checking accounts. Our landlord posted the final eviction notice this morning. We told him we could pay him by Friday, but he flat out refuses to negotiate with us anymore. He told us we have to be out by the end of the week. If you proceed with this lawsuit, we will literally be homeless. You are going to put your own pregnant daughter-in-law on the street. Please, Dad, you have to save us one last time." I sat perfectly still, listening to his desperate, pathetic pleas. He was still trying to weaponize his impending homelessness to manipulate my emotions. He still believed that deep down I was the same soft, accommodating father who would always swoop in to rescue him from his own catastrophic mistakes. He was completely wrong. I did not break my silence. I simply looked at him, waiting for my attorney to deliver the final, crushing blow. Aaron remained on his knees on the carpeted floor. He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, but as the seconds ticked by without my intervention, his sorrow began to harden into something else. The desperate pleading slowly twisted back into a profound sense of entitlement. He wiped his nose with the back of his expensive suit sleeve and stared at me. "Dad, are you even listening to me?" he asked, his voice rising in volume. "I am telling you that we are about to be thrown out onto the street. You have plenty of money. You are a multimillionaire. You can make all of this go away with a single signature. Are you really going to sit there in your cheap suit and watch your own flesh and blood become homeless? Are you going to put your own son on the street just to prove a point? Brittany stopped glaring at her husband long enough to realize that playing the victim was her only remaining strategy. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and let out a loud, dramatic sob. "George," she wept loudly. "Think about your future grandchild. The stress of this eviction is going to harm the baby. The property management company has been completely heartless. They do not care that I am pregnant. They do not care that Aaron lost his job. They just taped a notice to our door and told us to pack our bags. How can you let a faceless corporate landlord treat your family like absolute garbage? How will you ever sleep at night knowing your grandchild is sleeping in a homeless shelter because you were too stubborn to pay a simple bill?" Aaron nodded vigorously, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Exactly, Dad. The people who own our building are absolute monsters. They are a massive real estate holding company that buys up properties and ruins lives. We begged the property manager for a 30-day extension. I told him we had a baby on the way. I told him we just needed a little more time to gather the funds. But he looked right at me and said the owner of the building personally rejected our extension. The owner specifically instructed them to kick us out by Friday. They are ruthless, greedy parasites, Dad. You cannot let them win. You have to pay the balance and show them that our family cannot be bullied by some anonymous corporate tyrant." I sat perfectly still in my chair, listening to their passionate speeches. The sheer volume of irony in their words was almost too heavy to measure. They were attempting to manufacture a scenario where I was their ultimate savior against a cruel, unfeeling world. They wanted me to step up and fight the evil corporate landlord on their behalf. They wanted me to use my newly discovered wealth to protect them from the harsh reality of their own gross financial negligence. They genuinely believed that family loyalty was a one-way street. They believed they could forge my signature, steal my money, mock my modest lifestyle, and then demand my absolute protection the very second their actions caught up with them. I did not say a word to Aaron. I did not acknowledge Brittany's fake tears. I simply turned my head and looked at Warren. My attorney had been sitting silently beside me, observing the entire performance with a look of mild amusement. When I gave him a subtle nod, Warren reached for the last leather binder sitting on the edge of the mahogany table. It was the only binder he had not opened during the entire deposition. The room fell entirely silent as Warren unclasped the leather strap. The loud click echoed in the sterile conference room, making Aaron flinch. Warren opened the heavy cover and retrieved a thick stack of legal documents. The papers were printed on heavy stock paper, complete with raised corporate seals and official state watermarks. They were not bank statements or civil lawsuit filings. They were commercial property deeds. Warren carefully aligned the edges of the papers, tapping them gently against the table before handing the entire stack directly to me. I took the documents in my hands, feeling the weight of the ultimate truth they contained. I looked down at Aaron, who was still kneeling on the floor. I held the stack of papers out to him. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between my face and the documents. Slowly, he reached out his trembling hands and took the papers. Brittany leaned forward in her chair, straining her neck to see what I had just handed to her husband. Aaron flipped to the first page. His eyes scanned the bold black text printed across the top of the official deed. The document clearly listed the exact address of the luxury downtown Chicago high-rise, where Aaron and Brittany had lived for the past 2 years. It detailed the square footage, the property lines, and the commercial zoning codes. But the most important part of the document was the section outlining the primary ownership. The property did not belong to a faceless corporate conglomerate. It did not belong to a massive real estate holding company. The official owner of the building, the sole proprietary entity holding absolute control over every single unit in that luxury high-rise, was a private commercial trust. The named executor and sole beneficiary of that trust was George Baxter. I watched Aaron's eyes widen as he read my name printed on the commercial deed. His pupils dilated in sheer absolute terror. His hands began to shake so violently that the heavy papers rattled against each other. He read the line again and again, his brain desperately trying to reject the impossible information it was receiving. The cruel anonymous landlord he had just spent 5 minutes cursing the ruthless owner who had personally rejected his desperate plea for a 30-day extension was sitting directly across from him. Aaron looked up at me. His face was completely devoid of color. His mouth hung open but no words came out. He was entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the revelation. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my forearms on the mahogany table. I looked directly into my son's terrified eyes, and I spoke with a calm, devastating clarity. "Your landlord refused to negotiate, Aaron," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and completely merciless. "Your landlord ordered the property manager to reject your 30-day extension. Your landlord instructed the building staff to post that bright yellow eviction warning directly on your front door for all of your wealthy neighbors to see. And your landlord did all of those things because I am your landlord. You are officially evicted." Brittany let out a choked, gasping sound. She practically threw herself out of her chair, snatching the documents out of Aaron's trembling hands. She frantically read the ownership deeds, her eyes darting across the pages. When she saw my name printed as the sole owner of their building, her legs simply gave out. She collapsed back into her chair, staring at me as if I were a ghost. The illusion of her entire life was instantly vaporized. She realized that every single moment of luxury she had enjoyed for the past 2 years was provided by the very man she had mocked and degraded. The psychological destruction in the room was absolute. Aaron and Brittany were completely, utterly broken. They had spent 2 years believing they were inherently superior to me. They thought I was just an ignorant hardware store clerk who was barely scraping by. They thought they had outsmarted me by moving to an expensive downtown building far away from my quiet suburban life. They had absolutely no idea that I had purchased that specific high-rise building 5 years ago precisely because it was a solid commercial investment. When I moved them into that building and began paying their rent, I was literally just moving my own money from my personal checking account into my commercial business account. I owned the roof over their heads, the floors beneath their feet, and the walls that surrounded them. I held absolute power over their lives the entire time. Every arrogant comment they made, every lie they told, every extortion attempt they plotted was executed inside a cage that I personally owned. They had tried to trap me in a corner, but they had been living inside my trap since the very first day of their marriage. They had absolutely nothing left to say. There were no more threats to make, no more lies to spin, and no more fake tears to cry. They were drowning in massive debt, facing federal criminal charges for wire fraud, and they were being thrown onto the street by a man they had deeply underestimated. The deposition was over, and their total ruin was finally complete. The crushing silence in the conference room shattered the moment the reality of their eviction fully registered. Brittany did not weep. She did not ask for forgiveness or try to appeal to any remaining shred of my paternal affection. Instead, she turned her absolute terror into a weapon and aimed it directly at the man kneeling beside her. She looked at Aaron with a level of revulsion that was almost terrifying to witness. The transactional nature of their marriage was completely exposed for everyone in the room to see. She had stayed with him for the luxury high-rise, for the imported furniture, and for the promise of a massive inheritance. Now that the building was mine, the furniture was unpaid for, and the inheritance was legally secured in an impenetrable trust, he was completely useless to her. She sprang up from her chair, kicking it backward so violently that it crashed into the wall. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at Aaron's face. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the sterile walls. "You told me you had the money handled. You told me the $95,000 car loan was completely legitimate. I had absolutely nothing to do with that forgery, George. You have to believe me. He stole your social security number. He typed in your information on his laptop while I was sleeping. I told him not to do it, but he is completely obsessed with looking rich. Aaron stared at his wife, his mouth opening and closing in mute horror. The betrayal paralyzed him more completely than my revelation about the apartment building. "Brittany," he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic rasp. "What are you doing? We did this together. You were sitting right next to me on the couch when we filled out the application. You picked out the exact color of the leather seats. Do not lie to try and drag me down with you, Aaron," she shrieked, venom dripping from every single word. "I am not going to a federal penitentiary because you are a complete failure of a husband. I am pregnant. I am a mother. I am not taking the fall for your pathetic attempt to steal from your own father." She scrambled to gather her belongings. She snatched her expensive designer handbag off the table, stuffing her phone and her keys inside with frantic, jerky movements. She was operating on pure animal panic, trying to sever all physical and legal ties to the sinking ship that was her husband. She looked across the mahogany table at me, and then at Warren, attempting to force a desperate, innocent smile onto her face. "George, please," she begged, her voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. "You know I always liked you. I always told Aaron he needed to treat you better. I will sign whatever divorce papers I need to sign today. I will pack my things and leave the apartment by tonight. Just let me walk out of here. Please do not include me in this lawsuit. I was manipulated by him just like you were." I did not offer her a single word of comfort or condemnation. I simply sat, with my hands folded, resting on the smooth wood of the conference table. Warren remained equally silent, his expression completely unreadable as he watched her frantic performance. Taking our silence as a dismissal, Brittany turned on her heel and practically sprinted toward the heavy wooden door of the conference room. She reached out to grab the brass handle, desperate to escape the room, the lawsuit, and the catastrophic mess she had helped create. She just wanted to disappear into the busy Chicago streets and pretend none of this had ever happened. Before her hand could even touch the brass, the heavy door swung open from the outside, forcing her to stumble backward to avoid being hit. The door did not open for her. Two tall, uniformed police officers stepped into the room, completely blocking the exit. Their presence instantly shifted the atmosphere from a messy domestic dispute to a severe criminal proceeding. The air grew heavy and suffocating. The officers wore stern professional expressions, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. The faint sound of radio static echoed from their shoulder microphones. They scanned the room quickly, bypassing Brittany entirely and locking their eyes directly on my son. Brittany let out a sharp, terrified gasp and pressed her back against the wall, sliding as far away from Aaron as physically possible. Warren slowly stood up from his chair, buttoning his suit jacket. He had coordinated this exact timing perfectly. While their sleazy contingency lawyer was frantically running out of the building to save his own career, Warren had quietly signaled the authorities waiting down the hall. The trap had been flawlessly executed, and now it was time for the steel jaws to snap completely shut. "Aaron Baxter," one of the officers asked, his voice deep and authoritative, cutting through the tension in the room. Aaron could not speak. He was still kneeling on the carpet, staring at the police officers with wide, unblinking eyes. He slowly nodded his head, moving like a man trapped in a terrible, slow-motion nightmare. The officer stepped forward, bypassing the mahogany table and approaching my son. "Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for felony wire fraud and felony identity theft in relation to the fraudulent securing of a $95,000 automotive loan." The words hung in the air, absolute and irreversible. This was no longer a threat. This was no longer a familial argument over ungrateful behavior or unpaid rent. This was the crushing weight of the federal legal system coming down on a man who believed he was entirely above the law. Aaron slowly pushed himself up from the floor. His legs were shaking so violently he could barely stand. The second officer moved in behind him, grabbing his wrists and pulling them firmly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the silent conference room. It was the sound of absolute finality. "Dad." Aaron cried out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail of pure terror. "Dad, please do not let them take me." Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me permission to sign for the car. Please, Dad, I am your only son. You cannot let me go to jail." I looked at the man wearing handcuffs. I looked at the tears streaming down his flushed, terrified face. Years ago, hearing my son cry out in fear would have broken my heart. I would have moved heaven and earth to protect him from harm. I would have spent every dime I had to shield him from the harsh realities of the world. But that paternal instinct had been systematically dismantled and destroyed over the last 2 years. He had suffocated my love with his endless greed, his cruel manipulations, and his blatant disrespect for the memory of his mother. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger left in my chest. There was no sorrow or grief. There was only a cold, clinical detachment. I was looking at a criminal facing the direct consequences of his own calculated actions. He had stolen my identity. He had laughed at my supposed poverty. He had tried to extort the roof over my head. He had made his choices with complete arrogance, and now he was going to pay the price. I did not intervene. I did not stand up to comfort him. I sat in my chair, maintaining a steady, unblinking gaze as the officer began to read him his rights. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer stated firmly, guiding a sobbing Aaron toward the door. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Aaron twisted his neck, trying to look back at me one last time as they pushed him out of the conference room. His face was a mask of utter devastation, realizing finally and permanently that the safety net was gone. He had burned the bridge to the only person who had ever truly loved him, without conditions. The door closed heavily behind them, cutting off the sound of his weeping. The room was perfectly quiet again. Brittany remained pressed against the wall, staring at the empty doorway, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She was entirely alone now, completely stripped of the wealthy lifestyle she had married into and the protective buffer my son had provided. The consequences of their immense greed were absolute and inescapable. The cancer had been cleanly removed, and the healing process could finally begin. The heavy wooden door of the conference room clicked shut, leaving Brittany entirely alone with the wreckage of her life. I did not stay to watch her cry. I walked out of the downtown legal building, alongside Warren stepping into the bustling Chicago afternoon. The city moved around us completely indifferent to the absolute destruction that had just occurred on the 14th floor. I felt a profound lightness in my chest. The suffocating weight of parental obligation had been entirely lifted. Warren shook my hand on the sidewalk, promising to handle the immediate logistics of the eviction with the property management company. I got into my truck and drove back to my quiet suburban neighborhood. I knew the final act of this tragedy was already in motion. Brittany had absolutely no cash to pay for a taxi. Her premium credit cards had all been instantly declined or frozen by the issuing banks. She was forced to walk several miles in her expensive designer heels, navigating the noisy, crowded city streets, while her husband was being processed at the federal detention center. She moved with a frantic, desperate energy, clinging to the fading hope that she could still salvage some small piece of her luxurious lifestyle. She believed she could simply sneak into the building, pack her expensive clothes, grab her imported jewelry, and drive away in the $95,000 sport utility vehicle before the authorities came looking for it. She thought she could escape the massive blast radius of Aaron's criminal charges and start over somewhere else. She arrived at the luxury high-rise building, exhausted, blistering, and completely out of breath. She bypassed the main marble lobby to avoid the concierge staff and walked directly down the steep concrete ramp into the underground parking garage. She hurried toward their assigned premium parking space, digging frantically through her leather handbag for the heavy vehicle key fob. She turned the corner, fully expecting to see the sleek, black exterior of her stolen luxury vehicle waiting for her. Instead, she found absolutely nothing. The parking space was completely empty, save for a small, dark puddle of oil on the concrete floor. The dealership had moved with ruthless, incredible efficiency. The exact moment Warren notified their finance department of the confirmed wire fraud, they immediately dispatched a tactical recovery team. The vehicle had been forcefully repossessed and towed away hours ago. Pure panic began to set in. Brittany abandoned the garage and rushed to the private resident elevator. She rode it up to the penthouse floor, her hands trembling violently as she approached the heavy oak door of their apartment. She slid her electronic key card into the digital lock, expecting the familiar green light and the soft mechanical click. The lock flashed a hard, solid red. The mechanism emitted a sharp, buzzing sound, rejecting her access entirely. She tried it again and again, slamming her palm against the heavy wood. Then she looked up and saw the bright yellow legal document taped securely at eye level. It was an official notice of immediate eviction and property seizure, signed directly by the building management. The locks had been reprogrammed the very second the deposition ended. She was locked out of her own life with nothing but the clothes on her back and a rapidly dying cell phone battery. I was sitting on my back porch watching the evening sun dip below the tree line when my phone began to ring. The caller identification displayed an unknown number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. She was likely using a borrowed phone from a confused stranger on the street or a sympathetic barista at a nearby coffee shop. I pressed the accept button and brought the receiver to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply activated the secondary recording application on my tablet and let the silence hang heavily over the cellular connection. "George, please do not hang up," Brittany sobbed. Her voice was completely raw and stripped of all its previous aristocratic arrogance. I am standing in the hallway outside the apartment, and my key does not work. The car is missing from the garage. I have absolutely nowhere to go, George. You cannot leave me out here like this. I am pregnant. I am the mother of your future grandchild. You have to let me inside to get my things." I remained perfectly silent, listening to her pathetic weeping. She was still trying to weaponize a child she may or may not be carrying. When she realized the maternal guilt trip was completely ineffective against me, her tone rapidly shifted from panicked victimhood to calculated negotiation. The true nature of her character revealed itself with terrifying crystal clarity. "Listen to me, George," she whispered, her voice dropping low and conspiratorial. "I know Aaron ruined everything. I know he forged your signature and stole your money. He is a criminal and I want absolutely nothing to do with him anymore. I will gladly testify against him in federal court. I will tell the judge that the entire scheme was his idea. I will file for an immediate annulment of our marriage tomorrow morning. You will never have to see me or deal with me ever again." She paused, taking a shaky, desperate breath. "I just need a severance package, George. I just need $50,000 to start over in a new city. You have millions. 50,000 is absolute pennies to you. It is pocket change. Give me the money and I will legally erase myself from your family tree. I will leave Aaron to rot in prison, and I will walk away completely quiet. We can make a simple business transaction right now, and everyone wins." The absolute moral bankruptcy of her proposal was staggering. She was standing outside a locked door, while her husband sat in a federal holding cell, and she was actively attempting to sell him out for a quick cash payout. She viewed her marriage vows as a negotiable contract that could be liquidated for $50,000. She truly believed that every single person in the world operated with the same greedy transactional mindset that she did. I did not yell at her. I did not tell her how utterly repulsive her offer was. I simply allowed her to finish her desperate, cowardly pitch. "Are you completely finished, Brittany?" I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. "Yes, George," she replied eagerly. "Just wire the money to my sister's account, and I am gone forever. It is a clean break for everyone." I reached over and stopped the recording application on my tablet. I saved the audio file with a very clear, distinct label. "I am not going to wire you a single penny, Brittany," I said, "but I am going to do you a massive favor. I am going to take this exact recorded conversation, and I am going to forward it directly to Aaron's criminal defense attorney. I think it is incredibly important that my son knows exactly what kind of special person he married. I think he deserves to hear his loving wife offering to sell him to a federal prosecutor for $50,000 while he is sitting in a jail cell waiting for his arraignment. "No, George, wait!" Brittany shrieked, pure panic exploding in her voice. "You cannot do that. He will kill me. He will tell the police I helped him steal the mail." "You should have thought about that before you tried to extort a man holding all the cards," I replied. "Have a wonderful life, Brittany. Do not ever attempt to contact me again." I pressed the red button and disconnected the call. I immediately opened my phone settings and permanently blocked the unknown number. I took the audio file containing her desperate transactional betrayal and attached it to an encrypted email. I sent it directly to the public defender who had been assigned to represent my son. I watched the progress bar fill the screen until the message confirmed sent. I wanted Aaron to sit in his small concrete cell and listen to the clear, unmistakable sound of his wife abandoning him for a severance package. I wanted him to realize that the glamorous high society partner he had chosen over his own father viewed him as nothing more than a failed investment. I set my phone down on the patio table and leaned back in my chair. The evening air was cool and incredibly refreshing. The garden was quiet. The financial parasites who had attempted to drain my life had completely consumed and destroyed each other. The trap had closed perfectly, and the silence that followed was absolute bliss. 3 months have passed since the heavy wooden doors of the downtown conference room closed and sealed the ultimate fate of my son and his wife. The heavy, humid summer air has slowly surrendered to the sharp, biting chill of a Chicago winter. I find that the freezing weather suits my current state of mind perfectly. It is crisp, clear, and entirely free of any lingering illusions or false warmth. Aaron is currently sitting in a federal detention center, awaiting his criminal trial for wire fraud and identity theft. The public defender assigned to his case played the encrypted audio file I sent him, the exact file where Brittany eagerly offered to sell her husband to the federal prosecutors for a $50,000 severance package. I was told that Aaron did not say a single word after hearing his wife's voice making that ruthless transaction. He simply put his head in his hands and stared blankly at the cold concrete floor. His grand, arrogant vision of a wealthy, powerful life was completely reduced to the 4 gray walls of a jail cell. He finally understood that the woman he chose over his own father viewed him as nothing more than a failed financial investment. Brittany did not fare much better in the catastrophic aftermath of her grand performance. Her tearful viral video completely backfired the moment Warren filed the massive public defamation lawsuit against her. The internet operates with a ruthless and highly unpredictable justice. The very same strangers who had initially offered her sympathy and crowdfunding donations quickly discovered the public court records detailing her massive credit card fraud and the forged auto loan. The digital crowd turned on her instantly. Her social media accounts were flooded with absolute outrage, forcing her to delete her entire online presence just to escape the relentless harassment. Her pristine public reputation was completely annihilated. She now lives in a cramped, run-down studio apartment in a bleak suburban neighborhood, miles away from the downtown luxury she desperately craved. She takes the public bus to a grueling entry-level retail job just to pay for her basic groceries. There was no golden severance package. There was no clean break. There was only the harsh, unforgiving reality of living exactly within her actual means. I sat across from Warren Reed in his expansive corner office overlooking the sprawling city skyline. The heavy oak desk between us was completely bare except for a single stack of official legal documents. We were not preparing for another stressful battle. We were finalizing the absolute end of the war. I picked up a heavy brass pen and signed my name on the final line of the commercial real estate contract. I had officially sold the luxury high-rise building where Aaron and Brittany used to live. A massive international holding company had offered me a highly lucrative premium price for the property, and I accepted it without a single second of hesitation. I did not want to own a building that held such toxic, exhausting memories. I wanted that concrete structure out of my financial portfolio entirely. Warren collected the signed papers and gave me a rare, genuine smile. He informed me that the capital gains from the sale had successfully settled into my primary blind trust. The numbers on the computer screen were astronomical, but they brought me no inherent joy. I looked at Warren and instructed him to immediately wire a massive portion of those profits directly to a national legal defense fund. I specifically chose an organization dedicated to protecting vulnerable senior citizens from financial exploitation and family abuse. I wanted the immense wealth that my son tried to weaponize against me to be permanently transformed into a powerful legal shield for people who could not afford a shark like Warren Reed. I wanted to ensure that other elderly parents facing the terrifying threat of false guardianship petitions or fraudulent evictions would have the fierce legal ammunition they needed to fight back and win their freedom. Warren processed the massive charitable donation immediately. He shook my hand and told me it was the greatest privilege of his long career to represent me. The next morning, I woke up long before the sun crested over the horizon. My suburban home was wrapped in a deep, comforting silence that I had not experienced in years. I walked into my clean, quiet kitchen and brewed a simple pot of dark roast coffee. I did not check my phone for frantic emergencies. I did not brace myself for a barrage of manipulative text messages or fabricated hospital crises. My daily routine was entirely my own again. I walked into my bedroom and reached into the closet. I bypassed the row of expensive tailored suits I used to wear during my corporate logistics days. Instead, I pulled out my faded denim apron and my worn-out flannel shirt. I laced up my scuffed leather work boots and grabbed my car keys off the kitchen counter. I drove my old reliable truck through the quiet residential streets heading toward Miller Hardware. The heater roared gently, warming the cab of the truck as I watched the morning frost slowly melt off the windshield. Some people might look at me and wonder why a man with millions of dollars safely hidden in an offshore trust would willingly wake up at dawn to sweep floors and stock shelves for $14 an hour. They would never understand the profound grounding value of honest, simple labor. Working at the hardware store kept me firmly tethered to reality. It kept my hands calloused and my mind incredibly sharp. It was a completely honest transaction. I provided my time and physical effort, and they provided a fair, reliable wage. There were no hidden agendas, no emotional manipulations, and no toxic strings attached to my paycheck. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the hardware store and greeted my manager Dave with a firm handshake. The store smelled pleasantly of cut pine wood and fresh potting soil. I grabbed my rolling cart and headed toward the paint department to begin my morning shift. The aisles were quiet and peaceful for the first few hours. About halfway into my shift, a young couple walked down the aisle looking completely overwhelmed. They were holding hands tightly, their fingers stained with white primer and plaster dust. The young man looked at me and politely asked for help matching a specific shade of blue paint for a nursery room. They explained that they had just purchased their very first home, a small broken-down fixer-upper on the far edge of town. They admitted they did not have much money, but their eyes were shining with genuine excitement and profound mutual respect. I spent 30 minutes helping them select the perfect paint grade and the right durable brushes for their project. I watched the way the young Pesci listened to his pregnant wife, valuing her opinion and holding her hand with absolute unwavering devotion. They were building a life together from scratch, relying entirely on their own hard work and their shared equal partnership. There was no greed in their eyes. There was only pure, authentic love and a shared vision for their future. I helped them load the heavy paint cans into the back of their rusted sedan and wished them the absolute best of luck with their new family home. They thanked me profusely, treating the old hardware store clerk with far more dignity and basic human kindness than my own son ever did. I stood in the cold morning air watching their car drive away down the street until it disappeared around the corner. I took a deep, slow breath, letting the crisp winter wind completely fill my lungs. The financial parasites that had slowly drained my spirit and my energy for the past 2 years had been completely and surgically removed from my existence. The deep aching wound of their ultimate betrayal had finally healed over leaving behind a strong, impenetrable scar. My hidden wealth was completely secure. My quiet suburban home was my peaceful sanctuary once more. But most importantly, my self-respect and my dignity remained perfectly intact. I turned around and walked back inside the warm, brightly lit hardware store, ready to finish my shift. I had lost a son, but I had finally reclaimed my own life. And that trade was worth absolutely every single penny. The story teaches a powerful lesson about the true nature of wealth and value. Real wealth is not defined by the balance in a bank account, the price of one's clothes, or the exclusivity of the restaurants one frequents. Instead, genuine richness comes from authenticity, dignity, and the ability to treat others with respect and empathy regardless of their perceived social standing. The mother's test reveals that those who are overly obsessed with money and status are often masking a deep inner emptiness. Ultimately, true peace and freedom are found when we shed the need to impress others and choose to live honestly, valuing genuine connections over material possessions. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that true wealth comes from within.